The last funeral procession of the day rolled past the iron gates just as the sun began to sink behind the cemetery's black oak trees, and Vera Whitmore stood alone beside her cart of unsold roses, watching the mourners file through with their white lilies and store-bought carnations, not one of them even glancing at the flowers her dead husband had spent 9 years of his life creating. Her hands were numb. She had been standing there since 4 in the afternoon, and it was nearly 7 now, the November air biting through her wool coat. The cart held 200 stems of the most extraordinary roses anyone would ever see, night-blooming black beauties with petals that caught the dying light like oil on water, their centers deep crimson, their fragrance subtle and strange, like cloves and midnight gardens. Thomas had called them his legacy. She called them the last thing she had left of him, and she could not bear to watch them wilt in her kitchen, could not bear to throw them away, could not bear to do anything but stand here day after day, hoping someone would see what he had seen in them. No one ever did. 11 months. 11 months since the aneurysm had taken him in the greenhouse, his hands still dirty from repotting, his notebook open to a page of observations about pest resistance. 11 months since she had become a widow at 32, since the world had narrowed to this. A cart of roses no one wanted, a greenhouse she could barely afford to heat, and the endless suffocating weight of being the only person left who remembered why those roses mattered. She was crying again. She did not realize it until a tear dropped onto one of the blooms, sliding down the black petals like a bead of glass. She wiped her face roughly with the back of her hand, angry at herself. This was not what Thomas would have wanted. He would have told her to go home, to rest, to stop torturing herself. But Thomas was not here, and she did not know how to be anything other than this, a woman standing outside a cemetery, trying to sell beauty to people who could not see it. How much for the cart? The voice came from behind her, low and precise, with an accent she could not quite place. Old world, perhaps. European. She turned, startled, and found herself looking up at a man who should not have been standing there. He was tall, impossibly tall, dressed in a long black coat that seemed to drink in the twilight. His skin was pale as winter, his hair a shock of pure white that fell past his shoulders, and his eyes were the color of frozen silver. He looked like something out of a painting, something regal and ancient and not quite human, and when he looked at her she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "I'm sorry," she managed. "The cart," he repeated, his gaze moving to the roses. "All of it." "How much?" She stared at him. "You want to buy all of them?" "Yes, that's 200 stems. I'm asking $12 a stem." "That's $2,400, he said without hesitation. "I will give you 3,000 for the cart, the roses, and your time." Vera's breath caught. $3,000. That was 2 months of mortgage payments. That was the heating bill for the greenhouse through winter. That was the difference between keeping Thomas's work alive and watching it die, and it made her feel smaller than she had felt in months. "Why?" she asked, and her voice was sharper than she intended. "Why would you do that?" His expression did not change. "Because I need them." "You need 200 black roses, yes, for what?" He was silent for a moment, and she thought he might not answer. Then he said quietly, "A funeral." Something in his voice made her stop. She looked at him again, really looked, and saw what she had missed before, the fine lines of tension around his mouth, the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man carrying a weight he could not put down. He was grieving. She knew that posture. She wore it herself. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. He inclined his head slightly. "As am I, but I still need the roses." Vera looked down at the cart, at the flowers Thomas had died making perfect, and felt something twist in her chest. $3,000. She needed it desperately. But taking it felt like selling out, like turning Thomas's work into a transaction, like admitting that all of this, the years of labor, the failed crosses, the nights he had spent in the greenhouse chasing a vision only he could see, came down to whether someone was willing to pay. "No," she heard herself say. The man's eyes narrowed. "No, not like this." She straightened, meeting his gaze. "If you need roses like these, you need them grown properly. You need them cultivated. And if you need 200 now, you're going to need more later. Perhaps. Then I'll grow them for you," she said. "A commission. You tell me what you need, I'll grow it. But I'm not just going to hand you a cart and watch you walk away." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unnerving sense that he was reading her, measuring her against some standard she could not see. Then slowly he smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve of his mouth, but it changed his face entirely. "You are proud," he said. "I'm a grower," she replied. "And these roses deserve better than a cash transaction." "Very well." He reached into his coat and produced a card, cream-colored and heavy, with a name embossed in silver. Wolfram Quillen. Below it, an address in the old quarter of the city, the part where the historic mansion still stood behind iron gates and high walls. "Come to this address tomorrow at sunset. We will discuss terms." She took the card, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. His skin was cold. "Sunset?" I keep unusual hours, he said. Will that be a problem? No, she said, though she had no idea what she was agreeing to. Good. He looked at the roses again and something in his expression softened. What do you call them? Thomas called them Nox Eterna, Vera said quietly. Eternal night. A fitting name. He turned to go, then paused. Bring your terms, Mrs. Whitmore. I will bring mine. And we will see if we can come to an arrangement that honors what you are trying to protect. He walked away before she could ask how he knew her name, disappearing into the gathering dark like a shadow folding into itself. Vera stood there, holding his card, her heart beating fast and hard in her chest. She had just turned down $3,000. She had just agreed to meet a complete stranger at sunset in a part of town she had never been to. And somehow, for the first time in 11 months, she felt like she had made the right choice. The address on the card led her to a mansion that looked like it had been standing since the city's founding, all dark stone and wrought iron and windows that reflected the dying light like closed eyes. Vera stood outside the gate at 10 minutes to sunset, her portfolio of Thomas's notebooks tucked under her arm, and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The gate opened before she could knock. A woman stood there, middle-aged and severe, dressed in old-fashioned black. Mrs. Whitmore, she said. Not a question.
His Majesty is expecting you, His Majesty.
Vera blinked. I'm sorry, his what? But the woman had already turned, leading her up the long drive toward the house. Vera followed, too bewildered to do anything else. The grounds were immaculate, the gardens bare for winter but clearly tended with obsessive care. Everything about the place spoke of old money, old power, the kind that did not need to announce itself. The woman led her through a side entrance, down a hall lined with portraits of pale, regal figures in antique dress, and into a library that took Vera's breath away. The room was 2 stories tall, lined floor to ceiling with books, lit by lamps that cast a warm golden glow over leather and wood and the faint scent of paper and age. Fire burned in a massive stone hearth, and in front of it, standing with his back to her, was Wolfram Quillen. He turned as she entered, and she saw him clearly for the first time. He wore dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hair pulled back, and without the coat in the shadows, he was even more striking than he had been at the cemetery. He moved with a predator's grace, every gesture controlled and deliberate, and when he looked at her, she felt that weight again, that sense of being seen. Mrs. Whitmore, he said. Thank you for coming. You're welcome, she said, trying to steady her voice. Though I'm not sure I understand what I've walked into. That woman called you His Majesty. Because that is what I am, he said simply. I am the king of the vampire courts of this city and the territories beyond. Vera stared at him. You're joking. I am not. She waited for him to laugh, to tell her it was a game or a metaphor or an eccentricity of the very rich. He did none of those things. He simply watched her, patient and still, and slowly, horribly, she began to believe him. Vampires, she said slowly. Yes, vampires are real. Yes. And you're their king. Yes. She sat down in the nearest chair before her knees could give out. I need a minute. Take your time. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to make sense of it. Vampires. The word felt absurd in her mouth, something out of old movies and pulp novels, not something that belonged in the real world. But she thought of his cold skin, his unnatural stillness, the way he seemed to occupy space differently than other people, and something in her gut said it was true. Are you going to hurt me? She asked finally. No. Are you going to drink my blood? Not without your permission. She looked up at him. That's not as reassuring as you think it is, he almost smiled. I brought you here to just roses, Mrs. Whitmore, not to harm you. You have my word, the word of a vampire king, yes. She took a breath, then another. Then she opened Thomas's notebook and set it on the table between them. All right, she said. Then let's talk about roses. He sat across from her, his movements fluid and inhuman, and for the next hour they talked. He told her about the old courts, the vampire society that had existed in the shadows of the human world for millennia, and about the traditions that governed it. He told her about funerary rites that required black roses, flowers that bloomed only at night and symbolized the passage from one existence to another. He told her about a woman named Seraphine, the queen who had ruled before him, who had raised him from a fledgling and taught him what it meant to lead. And he told her that Seraphine had died 3 months ago, and that her state funeral was to be held in 6 months' time, and that the roses required for the rite had been systematically eradicated over the past decade by a man named Lucien Graves, a court-licensed grower who had bought the monopoly on funerary flowers and destroyed every competing stock to secure his position. He is manly, efficient, and utterly without sentiment, Wolfram said, his voice flat. He saw an opportunity and took it. And now, when I need roses for the woman who was my mother in every way that mattered, there are none to be found. Except mine, Vera said quietly. Except yours. She looked down at Thomas's notes, at the careful diagrams of cross-pollination, the charts tracking bloom cycles, the years of observation distilled into ink and paper. Thomas didn't breed them for funerals, she said. He bred them because he thought black roses were beautiful. He wanted to make something that had never existed before. He succeeded. He did. She closed the notebook. And if I grow them for you, I need to do it my way. In Thomas's greenhouse, using meth, I won't be rushed, and I won't be supervised by someone who thinks they know better. Wolfram leaned back in his chair, studying her. You are asking for autonomy, yes, and in return, I'll give you the finest roses you've ever seen, Vera said. Guaranteed to bloom on schedule in the quantities you need, cultivated with the care they deserve. And when this is done, you'll help me establish them as a legitimate strain, so no one can come along and destroy them the way this Lucian Graves tried to do to others. You want me to challenge the monopoly. I want you to break it. He smiled then, a real smile, sharp and approving. You are ambitious, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm protective, she corrected. There's a difference, perhaps. He stood, holding out his hand. Very well. You will grow the roses in your husband's greenhouse on your terms. I will provide funding, materials, and whatever else you require. And when the work is done, I will ensure that Nox Eterna is recognized as the superior strain and that no one dares to interfere with your stock again. She took his hand. His grip was firm and cold, and she felt a shiver run through her that had nothing to do with temperature. Deal, she said. Deal, he echoed. And then, still holding her hand, he said quietly, I am sorry for your loss, Vera. I know what it is to lose someone who shaped you. She looked up at him, at the grief in his silver eyes, and felt something shift between them. I'm sorry for yours too, she said. He released her hand, stepping back. We will begin tomorrow. I will send a car for you at sunset. I can drive myself. I am sure you can. But I am a king, and I am accustomed to ensuring my associates are cared for. He tilted his head. Indulge me. She wanted to argue, but there was something in his voice, a note of quiet insistence that made her nod instead. All right, tomorrow at sunset. Tomorrow, he agreed. The car that arrived the next evening was a sleek black sedan with a driver who did not speak but held the door for her with grave courtesy. Vera sat in the back, clutching her bag of grafting tools, and tried not to feel like she had stepped into someone else's life. The greenhouse was waiting when they arrived, lit from within, and Wolfram was standing just inside the door. He had dressed for work, dark trousers, a plain shirt, his hair tied back. He looked almost human except for the unnatural stillness of him, the way he did not seem to breathe. Show me, he said. She led him through the rows of benches, past the seedlings and the experimental crosses, to the back corner where Thomas's original Nox Eterna mother plant still grew, dark and glossy and vital. This is where it started, she said. Thomas crossed a variant of Rosa chinensis with a wild nightshade-adjacent species he found in a botanical archive. It took him 4 years just to get a viable hybrid and another 5 to stabilize the traits. Wolfram crouched beside the plant, his fingers brushing the leaves with surprising gentleness. It is extraordinary, it is, Vera agreed, and fragile. The genetics are unstable. 1 in 10 cuttings will revert to a parent type. The blooms are sensitive to temperature shifts, and they will only flower at night, which makes them nearly impossible to sell to traditional markets, which is why you were alone at the cemetery. Yes. He stood looking at her. You could have lied to me, told me they were easy to grow, taken my money and done your best. Why did you not? Because Thomas spent 9 years on these, she said. I'm not going to disrespect that by cutting corners. He studied her for a long moment. Then he said, I believe you and I are going to work well together, Vera Whitmore. They did. Over the following weeks, Vera fell into a rhythm she had not known since Thomas's death. She worked in the greenhouse during the day, tending the plants, making cuttings, preparing the soil, and at sunset Wolfram would arrive, and they would work together. Her hands in the dirt, his watching, learning, occasionally helping under her careful direction. He was a good student, patient, methodical, willing to listen. He did not try to rush her or question her methods, and when she explained the intricacies of grafting or the chemistry of soil composition, he listened as though she were teaching him statecraft. It was strange and wonderful and deeply, achingly familiar, because this was what she had done with Thomas, worked side by side in comfortable silence, building something beautiful together. But Wolfram was not Thomas. Thomas had been warm and quick to laugh, a man who wore his heart openly and loved with his whole being. Wolfram was cooler, more reserved, a man who measured his words and guarded his emotions behind walls of formality. But beneath that she began to see glimpses of something else, a dry humor, a fierce intelligence, a capacity for tenderness that he kept carefully hidden. And he was grieving just as she was. It came out in small ways. The way he spoke about Seraphine, his voice softening when he described her patience, her wisdom, the way she had taken a fledgling vampire with no family and no future and shaped him into a king. The way he paused sometimes, staring at nothing, as though he were listening for a voice that was no longer there. The way he threw himself into the work with a focus that bordered on obsession, as though growing these roses were the only thing keeping him tethered. One night, 2 months into their work, Vera found him standing in front of the mother plant, his hand resting on the edge of the pot. She would have loved these, he said quietly. Vera set down her tools. Tell me about her. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, she was the strongest person I have ever known. Not because she was powerful, though she was, but because she was kind. She ruled with a firm hand, but she never forgot what it meant to be vulnerable. She taught me that strength and compassion are not opposites. She sounds wonderful. She was. He looked at Vera, and there was something raw in his expression. I have ruled for 3 months, and every day I wonder if I am doing it right, if I am honoring what she built, if I am enough. You are, Vera said. You cannot know that. I can, she said, because you care enough to ask the question. He stared at her, and something passed between them, something unspoken and fragile. Then he turned away, his walls sliding back into place. We should get back to work. But Vera had seen it, the crack in his armor, the loneliness beneath the crown, and she realized with a start that she was beginning to care about him. Not as a client or a business partner, but as a person. As a man who was carrying a grief as heavy as her own, it terrified her. Because she had promised herself after Thomas that she would not do this again. Would not let herself feel, would not let herself hope, would not let herself fall for someone who could be taken away. Grief had nearly destroyed her once. She could not survive it a second time, but Wolfram was not asking her to survive anything. He was just there, night after night, steady and present, and slowly against her will she began to fall. She realized it the night he brought her tea. It was a small thing, absurd in its simplicity. But she had been working for hours, her hands cramped from grafting, and he had disappeared into the house and returned with a pot of tea and 2 cups, setting them on the bench beside her without a word. You did not have to do that, she said. I wanted to. She poured herself a cup, cradling it in her cold hands, and felt something inside her shift. Why are you being so kind to me? He looked surprised by the question. Why would I not be? Because you're a king. You could have just ordered me to grow the roses. You could have hired someone else. I could have done many things, he interrupted. But I chose this. I chose you. He met her eyes. You are not an obligation, Vera. You are a partner, and I value you. Her throat tightened. I don't know what to do with that. You do not have to do anything, he said gently. Just keep being who you are. She looked at him, at the honesty in his face, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. She was falling for him. She had been falling for weeks. Maybe from the moment he had looked at her roses and seen what no one else had seen, and it was terrifying and exhilarating and utterly, completely real. Wolfram, she said quietly. Yes, I'm glad you found me. He smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. So am I. But the world, as it always did, had other plans. The sabotage came on a cold March night, 3 months into their work. Vera arrived at the greenhouse in the morning to find the door ajar and the heat off. Her heart stopped. She ran inside and found devastation. Plants wilting, soil contaminated, the irrigation system leaking some kind of chemical that stank of acid and death. Half the stock was already gone, the leaves blackened and curling. The mother plant was barely alive. She fell to her knees, her hands shaking, and tried to save what she could. But it was too late. Someone had poisoned the water, and the damage was catastrophic. Wolfram arrived at sunset to find her sitting on the floor, surrounded by dead plants, her face streaked with dirt and tears. He did not ask what had happened. He simply knelt beside her, his presence solid and grounding, and waited. They're gone, she said finally. Most of them. Someone poisoned the system. His expression went very still. Who? I don't know. She gestured helplessly at the destruction. But this wasn't random. This was targeted. Someone knew what they were doing. Wolfram stood, his movements sharp and dangerous. Lucien Graves, you think? I know. His voice was cold, colder than she had ever heard it. He has been watching us. He knows we are a threat to his monopoly. And he has decided to eliminate the competition. Can you prove it? I do not need to prove it, Wolfram said flatly. I am the king. I can have him destroyed for this. No. He looked at her, startled. No. If you destroy him, it just proves him right, Vera said, forcing herself to stand. It proves that we can't compete legitimately, that we need a king's power to win. I won't build Thomas's legacy on intimidation. Vera, I need to prove provenance, she said. I need to show that these roses are a legitimate strain developed independently, with a documented lineage. If I can do that, I can break the monopoly without you having to crush anyone. That will take time, Wolfram said. Time we do not have. The funeral is in 3 months, then we work fast. She looked at the surviving plants, at the mother plant clinging to life. I can save some of this. I can propagate from the mother plant, force grow replacements. It will be close, but I can do it. Wolfram stared at her. You are asking me to step back, to let you handle this on your own. I'm asking you to trust me, Vera said, the way I've been trusting you. He was silent for a long time. She could see the war in him, the instinct to protect warring with the respect he had for her autonomy. Finally, he said, if you do this, you do it your way, but I will be here every night. Helping you. You don't have to. I want to, he said, echoing her words from weeks before. You are not doing this alone. She looked at him, at the fierce determination in his silver eyes, and felt something break open in her chest. Okay, she whispered. Okay. They worked like demons after that. Vera barely slept, spending her days in the greenhouse and her nights with Wolfram, coaxing life from the surviving plants. He was relentless in his support, bringing her food, making her rest, working beside her with a focus that matched her own. And slowly, impossibly, the greenhouse came back to life, but Lucien Graves was not finished. The challenge came in the form of a formal letter, delivered by courier to Vera's door. It claimed that her stock of Nox Eterna was illegitimate, derived from stolen court cultivars, and demanded that she cease all propagation and surrender her plants for destruction. Vera read it twice, her hands shaking with rage. He's lying. Of course he is, Wolfram said. He had been standing in her kitchen when the letter arrived, waiting to drive her to the greenhouse. But he has the backing of the old licensing board. If you cannot prove your provenance, they will side with him. I have Thomas's notebooks. I have documentation going back 9 years. And he will claim they are falsified. Wolfram's voice was tight with controlled fury. This is what he does, Vera. He buries his competition in legal challenges until they give up or go bankrupt. Then I'll fight him in court. You will lose, Wolfram said bluntly. Not because you are wrong, but because he has money and connections and a decade of precedent on his side. Vera slammed the letter down on the table. So what do I do? You prove provenance the old way, Wolfram said. You present your case to the vampire courts. She stared at him. Your courts? Yes, he met her eyes. The funerary rose laws were written by vampires for vampires. The Human Licensing Board is a recent creation and adaptation of our traditions, but the courts still have final say on matters of legitimacy. If you can prove to them that your roses are genuine, no human board can overrule it. And how do I do that? You testify, Wolfram said. You bring your evidence, you tell your story, and you let them judge. Vera's stomach twisted. Will they be fair? They will be honest, Wolfram said, which is not always the same thing, but I will be there, and I will make sure you are heard. She looked at him, at the certainty in his face, and felt a rush of gratitude so intense it took her breath away. Why are you doing this? She asked. Why do you care so much? He stepped closer, his expression softening. Because you matter to me, Vera. Because what you are doing honoring your husband, protecting his work, it is exactly what I am trying to do for Seraphine. And because somewhere along the way this stopped being about roses and started being about you. Her heart stopped. Wolfram, I am not asking you for anything, he said quickly. I know you are grieving. I know this is complicated, but I need you to know that I care about you. Not as a grower or a partner, but as a woman. As Vera. She stared at him, her pulse pounding in her ears. I care about you too, she whispered. I didn't want to. I tried not to, but I do. He reached out, his cold fingers brushing her cheek. Then let me help you. Let me stand beside you when you face the courts. Let me be there for you the way you have been there for me. She leaned into his touch, her eyes burning. I'm scared. So am I, he admitted. But we do not have to be scared alone. She kissed him. It was impulsive and desperate and probably a terrible idea, but she could not stop herself. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, and for a moment the world fell away. He was cold and solid and utterly present, and when he kissed her back, slow and careful and achingly tender, she felt something inside her come alive. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Vera, I know, she said. I know it's too soon, and I know it's complicated, but I don't care. I want this. I want you. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his silver eyes blazing. Then you have me, in whatever way you will take me. She smiled, shaky and tearful and radiant. Good. The court convened 2 weeks later in the great hall beneath Wolfram's mansion. Vera had not known such a place existed. A vast underground chamber carved from stone, lit by chandeliers and filled with vampires. They sat in rows, pale and regal and utterly silent, their eyes fixed on her as she stood in the center of the room, clutching Thomas's notebooks. Wolfram sat at the head of the room, presiding, his expression unreadable. He had warned her that he could not show favoritism, that she would have to make her case on her own merit, she understood. But it was still terrifying to stand there, alone, facing a room full of immortal predators. Lucien Graves stood to her left, manly and cold, his expression one of faint disdain. He had brought his own documentation, his own witnesses, his own air of absolute certainty. The arbiter, an ancient vampire named Cassius, called the session to order. We are here to determine the legitimacy of the rose strain known as Nox Eterna, cultivated by the late Thomas Whitmore and now tended by his widow, Vera Whitmore. Lucien Graves has challenged this legitimacy, claiming the strain is derived from protected court cultivars.
Mrs. Whitmore, you may present your case.
Vera took a breath, then she began to speak. She told them about Thomas, about his years of patient work, his meticulous records, his dream of creating something beautiful. She showed them his notebooks, page after page of crossbreeding data, failure logs, sketches of flower structures. She explained the genetics, the lineage, the sources of his parent stock, all of it documented and verifiable. And then she told them about the sabotage. Lucien Graves poisoned my greenhouse, she said, her voice steady. He destroyed months of work because he knew I could compete with him. He is not challenging my legitimacy because he believes I stole from the courts. He is challenging it because he wants to maintain his monopoly. Graves did not flinch. I have done no such thing. And Mrs. Whitmore has no proof of these accusations. I have the chemical analysis of the contaminated water, Vera said, producing the report. I have the invoice showing that the chemicals used were purchased by a shell company linked to Mr. Graves's business. And I have the testimony of the supplier who is willing to confirm the sale. A murmur ran through the court. Graves's expression tightened. This proves nothing. It proves you are willing to destroy competitors rather than compete fairly, Vera shot back. And it proves that you are terrified of what Nox Eterna represents, an independent superior strain that threatens your control. Cassius held up a hand. Mr. Graves, do you have evidence to support your claim that Mrs. Whitmore's roses are derived from court cultivars? Graves hesitated. Then he said, the resemblance is striking. The night-blooming trait, the coloration, these are hallmarks of the old strains. Hallmarks, yes, Vera said, but not unique to them. Thomas used a Chinese rose in a nightshade hybrid. The traits are convergent, not derivative, and the genetic analysis confirms it. She held up another report. I had the plants tested by an independent lab. The DNA is distinct from any known court cultivar. Cassius took the report, studying it. The hall was silent. Finally, he looked up. The evidence supports Mrs. Whitmore's claim. The strain Nox Eterna is a legitimate, independently developed cultivar, with documented provenance and no genetic link to protected court stock. He turned to Graves. Your challenge is dismissed, and your actions, if proven, will result in the revocation of your court license. Graves's face went white. You cannot. I can, Cassius said coldly. And I have. This court is adjourned. The vampires rose, filing out in silence. Vera stood there, shaking, scarcely able to believe it was over. Wolfram crossed the room to her, his expression blazing with pride. You were magnificent, she laughed, shaky and disbelieving. I can't believe that worked. I can, he said. You are brilliant and brave and utterly unstoppable. He took her hands, his touch grounding. The monopoly is broken, Vera. Nox Eterna is recognized. You did it. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears. We did it. He smiled, pulling her into his arms, and she let herself collapse against him, exhausted and exhilarated and finally free. The funeral was held on a warm June night in a garden Vera had never seen. It was deep below the city, a vast cavern transformed into something out of a dream. Stone arches covered in climbing vines, a reflecting pool that mirrored the stars painted on the ceiling. And everywhere, the black roses of Nox Eterna, thousands of them. Vera had worked herself to the bone to grow them, but seeing them here arranged in careful wreaths and garlands and cascading displays took her breath away. They glowed in the candlelight, their petals dark as midnight, their centers crimson as blood, and their fragrance filled the air with something that was both grief and celebration. The vampires gathered in silence, dressed in black and silver, their faces solemn. Wolfram stood at the center before a white stone bier where Seraphine's body lay, and Vera watched from the edge of the crowd as he began to speak. He spoke about duty and love, about legacy and loss. He spoke about the woman who had raised him, who had taught him what it meant to rule with wisdom and compassion. And he spoke about the roses, about the widow who had grown them, who had fought to keep them alive. These flowers represent what Seraphine believed in, he said, his voice carrying through the cavern. Beauty born from patience, strength born from kindness, and the knowledge that even in death something precious can endure. He placed a single stem of Nox Eterna on Seraphine's chest, and one by one the vampires came forward to do the same, until she was covered in them, a dark garden of remembrance. And then the ceremony shifted. The solemnity gave way to music, to dancing, to laughter and stories shared over wine. The funeral became a festival, a celebration of a life well lived, and Vera watched in wonder as the vampire court transformed the grief into something joyful. Wolfram found her at the edge of the crowd, his hand slipping into hers. Come with me, he said. He led her through the gardens, away from the crowds, to a quiet corner where a single rosebush grew. It was young, barely more than a sapling, but its blooms were unlike anything Vera had ever seen. Black petals edged in silver, the centers a deep, luminous gold. What is this? She breathed. A new cultivar, Wolfram said. I have been working on it, a cross between Nox Eterna and a wild strain from the old courts. I thought if we are to build something together, it should be something that belongs to both of us. Vera stared at him, her heart in her throat. You did this? With your notes as a guide, he said. I am not as skilled as you, but I am learning. She touched the petals, her fingers trembling. It's beautiful. It is ours, he said quietly, if you want it to be. She looked at him, at the vulnerability in his silver eyes, and felt a wave of love so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. I want everything with you, she said. I want to grow roses and build a life and figure out what it means to love again. I want it all. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. Then we will have it together. She kissed him, there in the garden of their shared grief and shared hope, and felt the pieces of her broken heart begin to mend. But there was still one question left unanswered. I'm human, she said, pulling back. I'm going to age, I'm going to die, and you're going to be here forever, and you do not have to decide anything now, Wolfram said. But if you want it, Vera, if you truly want it, I can offer you what I am. Immortality, a life at my side for as long as you wish it. She stared at him. You mean turning me, yes. Is that even possible? It is, he said, but it is not a decision to be made lightly. You would have to give up the sun, give up some of the warmth of your human life, and you would have to be certain, because once it is done, it cannot be undone. Vera looked at the rosebush, at the flowers that were part her husband's work and part Wolfram's, and thought about what Thomas would have wanted. He would have wanted her to be happy. He would have wanted her to live, to love, to keep growing beautiful things. I don't know yet, she said honestly. But I want to think about it. I want to see where this goes, and when the time is right, I'll know. Wolfram nodded. That is all I ask. They returned to the festival hand in hand, and Vera let herself be swept up in the joy of it, in the music and the laughter and the strange, wonderful community of vampires who had accepted her as one of their own. And for the first time in over a year, she felt at peace. The months that followed were the happiest Vera could remember. She and Wolfram settled into a rhythm, splitting their time between the greenhouse and his mansion, building a life that was part human and part vampire, part sunshine and part starlight. She continued to grow Nox Eterna, expanding her stock and supplying the courts with funeral roses, while also experimenting with new strains, new crosses, new possibilities. Wolfram proved to be an excellent partner, both in the greenhouse and in life. He was patient with her grief, never rushing her to move on from Thomas, and he was endlessly supportive of her work. He learned to graft and prune and tend the plants with a care that surprised her, and he brought a precision to the work that complemented her intuition beautifully. And slowly, steadily, she began to imagine a future that included him not just for years, but for centuries. The decision came on a cold October night, almost exactly 2 years after they had met. They were in the greenhouse, transplanting seedlings, when Vera set down her tools and said, I want to turn. Wolfram looked up, his expression carefully neutral. Are you certain? Yes, she met his eyes. I've been thinking about it for months, and I'm sure. I love you, Wolfram. I love the life we're building, and I don't want to spend the next 50 years watching it slip away. I want to be with you for as long as we have. He crossed the greenhouse in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. You have no idea how much that means to me. I think I do, she said, smiling against his chest. When? He asked. Soon, she said. But there's something I need to do first. She visited Thomas's grave the next day, bringing a bouquet of Nox Eterna and the new silver-edged cultivar she and Wolfram had named Seraphine's Hope. She knelt in the grass, placing the flowers on the headstone, and said, I'm going to do something crazy, Thomas. I'm going to become a vampire. I'm going to live forever, or as close to it as anyone can. And I need you to know that it doesn't mean I'm forgetting you. You gave me 9 years of the best love I could have asked for, and I will carry that with me always. But I'm also allowed to keep living. I'm allowed to keep loving, and I think you, of all people, would want that for me. The wind stirred the trees, scattering leaves across the grave, and she felt a sense of peace settle over her. Thomas was gone, but his legacy was alive in every rose she grew, and his love was woven into the fabric of who she was. She could honor that and still move forward. The turning happened on a moonless night in Wolfram's private chambers. Vera lay on the bed, her heart pounding as Wolfram sat beside her. It will hurt, he warned, and it will take time. But I will be with you every moment. I trust you, she said. He kissed her slow and tender, and then he bit. The pain was immediate and all-consuming. A fire that spread from her neck through her veins, burning away everything human. She clutched his hand, gasping, and he held her through it, whispering reassurances, his presence the only thing anchoring her to the world. It lasted for hours, days. She lost track of time in the haze of agony and transformation. But when it finally ended, when the fire faded and the world came back into focus, she opened her eyes to find Wolfram watching her, his expression filled with wonder. How do you feel? He asked. She sat up slowly, testing her new body. Everything was sharper, clearer, more intense. She could hear the rustle of fabric, the distant hum of the city, the beating of Wolfram's heart. She could see in the dark, every shadow distinct and vivid, and she felt strong, stronger than she had ever been. I feel alive, she said, laughing. He pulled her into his arms, his relief palpable. Welcome to eternity, Vera Whitmore. She kissed him, fierce and joyful. I'm ready. They spent the next months adjusting to her new existence. Vera learned to navigate the heightened senses, the need for blood, the strange timelessness of vampire life. She mourned the loss of the sun, the warmth of daylight on her skin, But she found compensations: the beauty of the night, the intimacy of sharing Wolfram's world, the knowledge that they had all the time in the world to grow and learn and love. And the roses miraculously flourished under her care. She had worried that turning would change her connection to them. But if anything, it deepened it. She could sense the plant's needs with uncanny precision, could coax blooms from the most stubborn stems, could create crosses that defied logic and produced flowers of breathtaking beauty. Together, she and Wolfram built a nursery that became famous throughout the vampire courts and, slowly, the human world as well. Nox Eterna became the standard for funerary rites, and Seraphine's hope became a symbol of renewal and second chances. They cultivated dozens of new strains, each one a testament to their partnership, their love, their shared vision. And Lucien Graves, stripped of his license and his monopoly, faded into obscurity, a footnote in the history of the flower trade. 5 years after Vera's turning, the city held a night festival in honor of Seraphine's anniversary. The streets were filled with music and dancing, and everywhere people carried black roses, a tribute to the queen who had ruled with wisdom and the widow who had brought her flowers back to life. Vera and Wolfram walked through the crowds hand in hand, anonymous and content, watching the joy their work had helped create. They ended the night in the greenhouse, standing in front of the original Nox Eterna mother plant. "Do you ever regret it?" Wolfram asked quietly. Vera looked at him, at the man who had walked into her life on the worst day she could remember and turned it into something extraordinary. "Never," she said. "You?" "Never," he echoed. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and looked at the roses blooming around them. Thomas's legacy grown into something bigger than either of them could have imagined, a garden born from grief and tended by love. "I think we're going to be all right," she said. Wolfram kissed the top of her head. "I think we already are." And in the quiet of the greenhouse, surrounded by the flowers that had brought them together, they stood together, two widows who had found in each other not a replacement for what they had lost, but a new beginning, a love that honored the past and embraced the future, a partnership built on soil and starlight and the certainty that together they could grow anything. The years unfolded like petals, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Vera expanded the nursery, training a small staff of human and vampire growers who shared her passion for the work. She published papers on hybrid rose cultivation that became standard texts in both the human horticultural community and the vampire courts. And she never stopped experimenting, never stopped pushing the boundaries of what was possible, driven by the same curiosity that had animated Thomas and now fueled her immortal existence. Wolfram proved to be a king worthy of Seraphine's legacy. He ruled with a steady hand, balancing tradition and innovation, and he used his position to protect the things he valued: art, beauty, knowledge, and the people who created them. The courts flourished under his leadership, and Vera watched with pride as he grew into the role, becoming not just a ruler but a builder, someone who left the world better than he found it. Their relationship deepened with time, the initial passion settling into something richer and more enduring. They learned each other's rhythms, their silences, their private griefs and secret joys. They built a home together, not just in the mansion or the greenhouse, but in the small daily rituals of their shared life. Morning blood tea, midnight walks through the garden, long conversations about everything and nothing. And they traveled. Now that Vera no longer aged, they explored the world together, visiting vampire enclaves and human cities, collecting rare plant specimens and stories. They stood in ancient gardens in Kyoto, walked through the night markets of Marrakech, traced the paths of old rose roots through Persia and beyond. Everywhere they went, Vera gathered seeds and cuttings, and everywhere they went, they left behind gifts. New strains, new knowledge, new connections between the human and vampire worlds. It was on one of these trips, in a walled garden in southern Spain, that Vera found the wild rose that would become their greatest achievement. It was a scraggly thing, growing in the ruins of a Moorish palace, but its flowers were extraordinary. Deep purple, almost black, with a fragrance that was both sweet and savory, like honey and smoke. Vera took cuttings, carefully propagating them in the greenhouse, and over the next decade, she crossed them with Nox Eterna and Seraphine's Hope, creating a new strain that combined the best traits of all three. They called it Eternus, the rose of eternity, and it became their signature. A flower that bloomed year-round in sun and shadow, a symbol of love that transcended boundaries. When the first Eternus bloom opened in the greenhouse 20 years after they had met, Vera and Wolfram stood together, marveling at what they had created. "It's perfect," Vera breathed. "It is us," Wolfram said. "Human and vampire, past and present, all woven together." She turned to him, her eyes bright. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" "All the time," he said. "From a cart of unsold roses to this." He gestured at the greenhouse, at the rows of thriving plants, at the life they had built. "You have given me more than I ever dreamed possible, Vera." "You've given me the same," she said. "A second chance, a new life, a love that makes every moment worth living." He pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her. Then let us keep living it, for as long as eternity allows. She kissed him there among the roses and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This was forever, this was home. This was the life she had chosen, and she would choose it again and again, every night for the rest of time. Decades passed, then centuries. The world changed around them, but the greenhouse remained, a constant in the turning wheel of time. Vera and Wolfram grew old in spirit if not in body, their love deepening with every passing year, their partnership unshakable. They did not have children. Vera's turning had made that impossible, but they poured their parental instincts into the work, nurturing plants and young growers with equal care. The nursery became a place of pilgrimage for those who loved roses, and Vera's name became legend, spoken with reverence in both human and vampire circles. Wolfram remained king, though he delegated more and more of the day-to-day governance to trusted advisors, preferring to spend his time in the greenhouse with Vera. He said he had spent enough centuries in council chambers and throne rooms. Now he wanted to grow things, to build things, to create beauty with his hands and his heart. And in their quiet moments, when the work was done and the night stretched out before them, they talked about Thomas and Seraphine, keeping their memories alive. They told stories about the people they had lost, honoring them not as ghosts to be mourned but as presences that had shaped them, that lived on in the work they did and the love they shared. One night, sitting in the garden as the Eternus roses bloomed around them, Wolfram asked, "Do you think they would be proud of us?" Vera considered the question. "I think Thomas would be amazed," she said. "He dreamed of Nox Eterna being recognized, but I don't think he ever imagined it would become what it is, and I think he would be happy that I kept going, that I didn't let grief stop me." "I think she would say you have honored her legacy," Vera said. "You've built a court that values compassion and creativity. You've used your power to protect, not to dominate. And you've found love, which is something she always wanted for you." Wolfram smiled, his expression soft. "I hope you are right." "I am," Vera said, "and I think they would both be glad we found each other." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "So am I." They sat in silence, watching the roses sway in the night breeze, and Vera thought about how strange and wonderful life was. She had started as a widow with a cart of unsold flowers, and she had become this: a vampire, a grower, a partner to a king. She had lost Thomas, but she had found Wolfram. She had grieved, but she had also healed, and she had learned that love was not a finite resource, that the heart could hold more than one great love, that honoring the past and embracing the future were not mutually exclusive. She had learned that life, even immortal life, was about growing plants, growing knowledge, growing into the person you were meant to be. And she had learned that the best way to honor those you had lost was to keep living, to keep loving, to keep creating beauty in their name. "Thank you," she said quietly. Wolfram looked at her. "For what?" "For buying my cart that night," she said. "For seeing what no one else saw, for giving me a reason to keep going." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "Thank you for refusing to be bought, for insisting on your terms, for being brave enough to fall in love again." She smiled, radiant and eternal. "I would do it all over again." "So would I," he said. And there, in the garden they had built together, surrounded by roses that bore witness to their love, they sat in perfect contentment, two souls who had found in each other not just a partner but a home. The story could have ended there, in that moment of quiet joy. But life, even immortal life, is not a single moment. It is a continuum, a river of experiences that flows on, and Vera and Wolfram's story continued to unfold. They faced challenges, of course. There were droughts that threatened the greenhouse, political upheavals in the vampire courts that required Wolfram's attention, and moments of doubt when the weight of eternity felt too heavy to bear. But they faced them together, and that made all the difference. They also had triumphs. The Eternus Rose won international acclaim, becoming a symbol of peace and reconciliation between the human and vampire worlds. Vera was invited to speak at conferences, to consult on botanical projects, to mentor young growers who wanted to follow in her footsteps. And Wolfram, inspired by her example, established a foundation to support artists and creators, ensuring that the court's wealth was used to nurture beauty in all its forms. And through it all, they loved each other with a constancy that was both fierce and gentle, a love that had been forged in grief and tempered by time, a love that was as enduring as the roses they grew. On the 100th anniversary of the night they met, they returned to the cemetery where it had all begun. The place had changed. The old iron gates had been replaced, the grounds expanded, the headstones modernized. But the feeling was the same, a place of endings and beginnings, of memory and hope. They walked together to Thomas's grave, now shaded by a tree that had not been there before. Vera knelt, placing a bouquet of Eternus roses on the headstone. "Hello, Thomas," she said softly. "It's been a long time. I wanted you to know that the roses are thriving. They're more than we ever imagined, and I'm happy, truly deeply happy. I hope you are too, wherever you are." She stood and Wolfram slipped his arm around her waist. "He would be proud of you," he said. "I know," Vera said, "and so would Seraphine." They left the cemetery hand in hand, walking into the night that was theirs, and as they did, Vera looked up at the stars and felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the life she had lived, the life she was living, and the life still to come. For the people she had loved and the people she loved now. For the roses that connected it all, threads of beauty woven through time. And for Wolfram, who had seen her on the worst night of her life and chosen to stay. Who had bought her roses and won her heart. Who had shown her that even in the deepest grief there was still room for joy. She had been a crying widow who could not sell a single rose. And he had been a vampire king who bought her entire cart in one breath, and in doing so had given her the world. It was a love story written in petals and soil, in moonlight and patience, in the slow, steady work of growing something beautiful. And it was a story that would continue, night after night, bloom after bloom, for as long as eternity allowed, because some loves are meant to last forever, and theirs was one of them.